Hello and welcome to a deeper dive with Dara Cam. That is me. We are coming at you from the Lafayette Park Rehabilitation Center again today. And we will be for probably the next, 4 or 5 weeks. So listen, folks, we have a real treat for you today. We are talking with Democratic consultant, strategist Steve Schale. He's been around for a minute and he has a lot to say about where Democrats need to go, about what Democrats need to do to shake off the Democratic doldrums in the Sunshine State. Stick with us for a deeper dive with Democrat Steve Schale.
And so if you're not competing in Florida as a Democrat, the only thing you're doing is giving $200 million to the next Republican nominee for president and saying, you go spend it wherever you want.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam. That is me. Today we have a special guest I'm very excited about. He's one of my OGs, Steve Schale, Democratic consultant, analyst, all things Democrat extraordinaire. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Thanks, Dara. I'm excited about this, and I will not tell anybody how long we've known each other to preserve our fiction of our youth.
Total fiction. Yeah, we can pretend. It's the fan dance.
That's right. That's right.
So let's jump right into it. The Dems right now you've been doing this, as you say, for a long time. I want to let our listeners know that you ran President Obama's 2008 campaign in Florida, and he won Florida. You also were the CEO of a super PAC that was backing Joe Biden. A lot of people thought you had gone cuckoo la la when you signed up to do that, and lo and behold, you got 2 presidential notches under your belt, a third if you count Obama's re-election, which you also worked on. So just so we know, this guy's got some props. Now let's turn to the Florida Democratic Party, which, wait a second, are they in turmoil again? Are they repurposing again? We have known each other a long time. How many conversations about this have we had?
I tell you, it's funny. So yesterday I was speaking to our mutual friend, Dan Gelber, who's now the mayor of Miami Beach, and as you remember, Dan and I kind of came to work. Dan became the Democratic leader of the Florida House in 2005.
Yeah.
I became his political guy, and at that point, we were trying to figure out how to restructure the House caucus side of the operation, which, for your listeners who are unaware, that's the side of the Democratic Party that recruits people to run for the Florida House of Representatives and then tries to get them elected. And when we started in 2005, Democrats had lost seats in the Florida House every cycle for 14 years in a row. As you can imagine, trying to convince people to give us money was not super easy given the fact that we had this record. So the first thing we did was we tried to understand what was unique about our model, the way that the office was set up and the process was done compared to the rest of the country. And what we realized is we had a unique model. Nobody else did it the way we did it. And that may have been one of the reasons why we were, really in bad shape. And, it was, we turned things around. We set that cycle the largest net gain for the Democrats in the legislature in our state history. Sadly, that record still remains. I keep asking somebody to beat it, and they don't seem to want to. But no, as I said to Dan yesterday on our call, it feels a lot of deja vu. It feels like the party today is in a very similar place to what it was in 2005. Again, for folks who were new to this, coming out of the 2002 election, Governor Jeb Bush had been reelected by a large margin, I think 15 points or so. In 2004, John Kerry had lost Florida by 5 or 6, and there were real questions about whether or not the state party or whether the Democrats in general could be successful going forward. I always believed then that it was a state that could be competitive. I still believe that now, but there are very real problems that have to be addressed if we want to be relevant going forward.
It's funny you used the word relevant. I had that in one of my I used that word in one of my questions that I had prepared for you. There right now, and I apologize if I don't know the details of all who's in the running, but I know that at least former state senator Annette Taddeo, Miami Democrat, who won when she won a special election, defeated a Republican who was expected to win in that seat. She recently lost a bid for Congress, and former Agriculture Commissioner Nikki Fried, who was for 4 years the state's only statewide elected Democrat. She lost a bid in the primary gubernatorial race to Charlie Crist, which I know all our listeners are savvy. They all know all that. But anyway, do you have a favorite in that race, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've been helping Annette in the race. Now, this was before Nikki got in. I mean, I'm not changing alliances, don't get me wrong, but to me, to where we are today, there's probably only 50 or 100 people in the state that could actually sort of do the job. In that you need somebody who has the ability to raise money, has the confidence of donors, or at least will get donors to return their phone calls or take their phone calls. You need somebody who I think, his understands the challenges in swing districts and knows what it takes to win elections. And the other thing, and this is, I don't know where Nikki's head is on this. I've talked to Annette about it. You need somebody who understands this is very likely the last political job they'll ever have. I as you know, Dara, to date ourselves, to eliminate the fiction of our youth.
Sure.
I went to work for the Florida Democratic Party in 2005, and Karen Thurman was our chair. Again, coming out of a very similar situation. In addition to the party losses, we had, Scott Maddox had left the Florida Democratic Party as an institution as a complete dumpster fire. I mean, we were
broke.
Flat. Well, we were worse than flat broke.
Right.
We were probably $1 million in debt. We couldn't even get a credit card.
Right.
The IRS had tax liens for unpaid payroll taxes. I mean, it was a nightmare. And
side note,
Karen
he's
Thurman
in prison right now. Unrelated, but anyway.
Unrelated, but maybe not surprising.
Right.
But you had, at that point, Karen Thurman was a former member of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
She had the gravitas to sort of lead in the moment. She had the relationships to raise the money. And she had made the decision that she knew that the things that she had to do to be a good chair were probably going to eliminate any possibility of her ever running for office again. And she was comfortable with that. And I think that's sort of where we are now, which is, this is not it's not a platform for anybody to, kind of grow their own base. Like, you need somebody who can get in, do the work, commit to do it for 4 to 6 years. And again, I think, there's every problem the Florida Democratic Party has. The solution, frankly, is they need to raise more money. And, I talk to activists who will call me or, send me a message on Twitter or whatever. Almost everybody that has an idea on what the Florida Democratic Party needs to do is right. Like, yes, I mean, they need to do more outreach in communities. Yes, we need to do more voter registration. Yes, need to do a better job of clearly defining who we are. Those kind of things are who they are. All of those things take money. And so, it's that's the biggest challenge for the next chair is to build the confidence of donors to reinvest in the party in a way that's not really been done since Barack Obama was president.
That is a major challenge, Steve, because the losses have been so significant, and because of the elephant in the room, pun intended, party-wise, not size-wise, of Ron DeSantis. I mean, he seems really sort of gargantuan in terms of his clout and the kind of control he has over not just the legislature. I mean, let's face it, Steve, the Republicans have control of all 3 branches of government in Florida right now.
Yeah.
So and they will probably for a while. So how do you convince donors that Florida is a state that you want to spend money on?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I mean, the first is you have to recognize that, like, you know, sort of take DeSantis out of the picture. The whatever work is done now at the Florida Democratic Party is probably not going to pay dividends for two, three, I mean, 2 cycles, 3 cycles down the road.
Right.
So, I kind of almost look at 2024, and again, I'm not there. I'm not going to go work there. So use we as the kind of royal we. But I mean, if I were there, I would look at 2024 as a cycle to kind of get back on your feet. To build a good base, register voters, kind of get the confidence of donors. I mean, one of the biggest problems that the Florida Democratic Party has had, and there are some folks on my side who may not like this, what I'm going to say, but there was an intentional effort after Barack Obama's second election to move things traditionally done by a state party to C3 and C4 groups outside. And donors took their money out of the party. They put it in, behind any number of these groups that got stood up to do registration, to do turnout, to do candidate recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
And, these things that, when I talk to my Republican friends, they just sort of shake their head. I mean, these things that political parties traditionally have done kind of got outsourced. They weren't outsourced. There were a lot of us who didn't think necessarily it was a good idea. I was certainly in the boat who didn't think it was a good idea. But a lot of those donors, there were, I mean, to be blunt, I mean, there are groups out there in Florida whose financial base is built on the idea that the Democratic Party is useless.
Yeah.
And so, I mean,
it's
like,
a cottage industry. Not a cottage industry, but it is a mega industry.
There's a lot of good and smart people on that side. I'm not trying to slap everybody, but I think that my view of it is, like, everything that's done on the outside should be a value added, not to replace what the core mission of a party should be. And so, for me, the next chair, whether it's, and I think it's going to be either Ned or Nikki, the next chair, one of their primary roles is to build trust with those donors who have felt like that their money was better spent outside of the party, that it's actually better spent inside the party, to do some things, whether it's win some elections down the ballot. One of the things we did in 2005, and frankly, one of the things to sort of Scott Maddox's credit, that helped kind of stem the tide coming out of 2004, which felt very similar to today as a party, was going out and winning some mayor's races.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, winning some local races, showing some momentum, showing some competence. This big mayor's race in Jacksonville in May. I think that, that would be a huge win if Democrats were to win there. There's some other, races, local races this year. Just show some progress, show donors that you can build an operation that makes sense. Because for me, the argument for Florida has always been, and this was, I went back there and for reasons that make no sense, and reread the introduction to our 2008 campaign plan for Barack Obama. And the introduction was basically like, win Florida and you're president. Because the reality is that the math for Republicans, the last Republican to win the White House without winning Florida was Calvin Coolidge. We had 6 electoral votes and no air conditioning, and malaria was still running wild. So it's a very different state. The reality is for them, they have to win here. And so if you're not competing in Florida as a Democrat, the only thing you're doing is giving $200 million to the next Republican nominee for president and saying, you go spend it wherever you want. And, one of the sort of, I think, untold stories of what Michael Bloomberg did, and people can debate whether he spent his money wisely or not. That's fair. But by spending $100 million in Florida, he forced Trump to double down in Florida because they had to win here if he had any chance of getting reelected. And what that meant is groups like ours and the Biden campaign were able to have massive spending advantages in states that ended up deciding the presidency: Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And so, my concern is if you write off Florida, it's absolutely true. My Democratic friends in D.C. are absolutely right. You do not have to win Florida as a Democrat to win the White House, but they have to win it. And so, in the same way that, now Republicans don't spend a penny in California, that means that all the money we would have spent in California, or all the money we'd spend in New York, or all the money they would spend in Texas, that gets to go anywhere else. And to me, it's as much of a chess move as it is, anything else.
Right. So Republicans have to win Florida. Dems don't. That's interesting. Stick with us. We'll be right back with Steve Schale.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. Can we agree that Florida is, because I've been saying this since President Trump was elected, Florida is not a swing state, it's a red state. Can we put that to rest finally? Now Florida is a red state, and maybe we could become a swing state again, or am I wrong?
So, I mean, listen, I would never argue that Republicans don't have a significant advantage here. And I wouldn't really argue that I think it's that Republicans won't win Florida. I mean, I think if Joe Biden wins Florida in 2024, the reality is it's probably an election and he wins 350 electoral votes. I don't know if that happens or not. That being said, I don't believe it has gone from a 3-point state in 2020 to a 18-point state in 2 years. I don't believe that for a heartbeat. For all the talk about people that have moved in here, the total number of people that have moved in here and voted are like 300,000 out of 15 million registered voters. Does that make a difference? Sure.
Right.
Does that move the state from 3 points to 18 points? No. And so, I think you had a perfect storm this cycle. I mean, to the DeSantis people's credit, they ran a really smart campaign. They had all the money in the world to make whatever decisions they wanted. I mean, I've worked on campaigns where you don't have to say no to anything, and it's a lovely experience. And they had somebody once sent an ad that they put out that was phenomenal. I forget which one it was, and I was like, it's a phenomenal ad, but it's also the kind of ad you get to run when there's no opponent. Because you're not in the conversation. When you're in a back and forth with an opponent, the back and forth tends to drive the content.
Right.
When you don't really have an opponent, you can say whatever you want.
You can say whatever you want.
You
just throw stuff against the wall, and if it sticks,
Yeah. So you had Democrats who, weren't investing in Florida because it was a bad year for Democrats, and so you had to spend your money in states like Arizona and Pennsylvania and places where you're trying to protect your own. So there was no incentive to spend money in Florida as a Democrat. DeSantis was incentivized to run up the score, and they did. I mean, they ran a great race. I mean, I'm in no way going to criticize it in any way. And they did what they wanted to do. They wanted to run up the score. They were incentivized to, and they did. But I would never say, nor would you, that say that the fact that Bill Nelson beat Katherine Harris by 30 points one cycle, that didn't mean that Florida was a Democratic state.
No.
That was just the nature of that race.
It just feels to me, Steve, like the state has become more conservative over the past 5, 6, 7 years. Is that, and you're a numbers guy, so maybe me talking about my feelings or my impressions doesn't make sense to you, but it seems to me that just Joe Lunchbucket, people that I talk to on the street, that I'm not getting out on the street now. I'm home in the wheelchair, but it seems to me there's been a shift to the right, and I think a lot of that had to do with COVID. But I mean that is true, don't you think? The Republicans have outpaced the Democrats in terms of voter registration too for the first time. It just seems not only, and maybe this is a reflection of the Republican Party, the Republicans in general are farther to the right than they were 5 or 6 or 7 years ago.
Well, I mean, I think that there are two things that are, or maybe 3 trends nationally that my party should worry about that just get magnified in Florida. So the reality is that we still do fairly well, better than Republicans nationally with Hispanics, but we haven't done as well as we did. And so, and you have the challenge that we've never done as well with sort of Latin American exile type, Caribbean exile,
Mm-hmm.
Cubans, Colombians, Venezuelans, et cetera, as we have with folks from Central America and Mexico as a party. And so you have a population of Hispanic voters that we've always had a little more trouble with than another. And it's the fastest growing population in our state. And so my party's challenges with a segment of the Hispanic vote become magnified in a massive
Mm.
way here because of the growth. It is not a secret to anybody that, since Clinton, since Obama, we've really struggled with non-college whites. And those struggles are increasing every cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Pasco
Florida's white
County. I
population.
think Pasco County when I think of that for some
Pasco County
reason.
is the great example of this. Yeah, I mean, Florida's white population is different than a lot of other sort of swing states or whatever you want to call them, in that our white population is a lot more non-college than it is college.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, you may not see that same sort of dynamic in other kind of states that are more suburban. So that's a problem. And the third is, and I think this is one of those things that we don't talk about as a party enough. We're not doing as well. We're still winning African American and Caribbean voters by substantial margins, but Republicans have ticked away at that a little bit, and maybe it's moving it from 8% to 12%. But there's a specific problem with Black men and Caribbean men, problem for Democrats in terms of reaching those voters. And so, those three things those are three of the most important segments of the vote in Florida for anybody. And those are three things that my party's struggling with. So all of these problems become magnified. My argument is if we're able to kind of course correct in terms of our the way we talk to Hispanic voters, if we're able to find some issues to talk to non-college whites, if we're able to kind of fix some of the challenges with Black voters, then not only does Florida get better, but now we're competitive in a whole lot of other places. Because my concern as a Democrat, as an American, because like I in the end, I think I'm a free market person. We've known each other a long time. I'm not a hardcore. I mean, I'm a lot less partisan than my biography makes me believe. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want good government, and I think that in the end, the more competitive elections you have, leads to a better quality of policy. And so, I don't like the fact that there's only 5 or 6 truly swing states in America. That's not healthy for democracy. And as a Democrat, if Democrats are only competitive in statewide elections in states that Joe Biden won, we'll never have more than 50 members of the U.S. Senate.
Mm.
And so, and probably always struggle to control the Congress. So if you're a
Mm-hmm.
Democrat and you want Democratic majorities, you should recognize that in order to get there, we have to be more competitive with voters in places like Florida, because if we're not competitive in places like Florida,
Hmm.
how are we going to reelect somebody in Montana or West Virginia or ever compete in a place like Kansas again or Iowa? I mean, these are bigger challenges that again get magnified here.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I think
Yeah.
what I read your blog, and everybody who has not done so, I'm sure all of our listeners are aware of your blog, but I highly recommend people go to your blog, steveschale.com, Steve, Schale,
You got
Shale.
it.
Yeah. It's definite.
These days it's a mixture of politics and occasional travel writing for my mentorship work I do overseas.
I
So
enjoyed
which
the
is fun
piece
too.
about your Eagle Scout experience. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but I wanted to get back to what you were talking about here in Florida. I think sometimes it is hard for folks to look at the long game. I mean, they want that snatch that shiny bright object. I know for me, I succumb to that
yeah.
myself. So you're going to have to get folks have to maybe recognize that 2024, don't expect to see big changes in 2024. You really need to build the infrastructure, rebuild or build an infrastructure.
Yeah.
And you've got to chip away at those voting blocks that you identified, Steve. I've been having these same conversations with the Democratic leaders for 20 years about how they need to
Yeah.
do more to bolster support in those populations. So I don't. How do you do that? You need to talk
Well,
to
I mean,
them
again,
all year long, not
yeah. I
just
mean,
3 weeks before an election.
yeah. I mean, so I think there are a couple of things that are interesting there. I think that there were a lot of Democrats, as you probably remember, who made the mistake coming out of 2012 of thinking Barack Obama won Florida twice. We're now a blue state, and we can start thinking about how to become more blue,
Right.
rather than recognizing that Barack Obama won the persuasion game twice, and that's why he won. And like it wasn't, Florida hadn't fundamentally changed in the same way that I don't believe Florida's fundamentally changed from say 2018 to 2022. Sure, it's gotten more Republican in terms of registration. Sure, there's some trends that don't work our way. It's not like Florida changed dramatically between 2004 and 2008 either, you know. And so, but there was in 2012 again. I think the decision to de-invest from the party was one that is really sort of paid off in all the wrong ways right now. And so the truth is, and you've covered this for a long time, the Florida Democratic Party as an entity has never really existed. I mean, it kind of existed when Karen Thurman was here
Yeah.
because the DNC invested some money. Obviously the Obama campaign invested money, and then Obama invested more money, kind of in the interim because they understood it was important. But outside of that, the Florida Democratic Party basically exists as an entity for about 4 months out of every 4 years.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's never really been, and before, you go back to the olden days when the days of Lawton Giles, the Florida Democratic Party was basically just a depository of money. I mean, that's what parties were in those days. They were a place where you would raise money that were over the individual limits because you didn't have all these entities that exist today that members and candidates can raise money into. And so, the party was basically an accounting office for a bunch of years, and then it became a field office. And if you really want to build a competitive party long term, you look a place like Wisconsin. They've built a real statewide operation which exists from year to year, and they've been able to win tough elections in a state that demographically, when you look at, is a place that Republicans should win. And I think that, to me, that's the way. If you and again, like I don't necessarily believe that anything in politics is permanent. I don't necessarily believe that any blue states are blue states forever, red states are red states forever. I mean, Democrats elected a governor in Kansas, but you're not going to do it without investing in that real infrastructure and recognizing that, you got to be in it for the long game.
Let's finish up by talking about Ron DeSantis. You've been doing this a long time, as we've both noted. I beat you because I covered the 2000 recount. So
I was there too.
Yeah, I know you were. I know you. I think that's when we met, actually.
Probably.
Governor DeSantis seems to be someone who was in the right place at the right time. He has capitalized on this movement that President Trump unleashed. This grievance kind of driven. Not to minimize his accomplishments, but there's a lot going on with Governor DeSantis. This culture wars now has become his brand. Do you think that he is going to? I think sometimes I get tunnel vision because see him and I'm focused in Tallahassee and Florida. How will he do competing nationally?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that they are. Governor DeSantis is very shrewd. His people are very smart. And I think that his biography coming out of Florida is more complicated than some of the people on my side necessarily want to, believe. Yes, he's engaged in sort of what some may consider these culture wars. He's also, frankly, been very good on things like climate and resiliency, and so. I think that there's there's a lot of layers to the DeSantis story. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know if he runs for president or not. I think that, one of the things that's changed over the last decade or two is, it used to be that there was a disincentive to running for president and losing. If you ran for president and you lost, you kind of had to go climb Mount Rainier and go disappear for a while. I think the incentive structure now is such of like, why wouldn't you run for president? Like the worst case scenario is you lose and you sell a bunch of books, and you get on TV a lot. So, I sort of start from the standpoint of like, I don't know why anybody wouldn't run for president if they were thinking about it. There's no, unless you really kind of shit the bed, there's not a lot of disincentive for it. I don't, I think he has it's clear he has a very good sense of kind of where their base is. And as what I say going forward, in no way is meant to be kind of critical or disrespectful, because I think he's a very talented guy. It is very different running for president. As you said, I've worked on 3 of them now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different level of attention. It's a different level of pressure. You're dealing with voters who, you don't deal with on an everyday basis. It is, I don't know if Charlie Crist or Rubio or sort of the welcome to the NFL. Like it is a very different scenario. And so, you've seen really talented people in the past struggle in that environment. And you've seen people that people didn't necessarily think would do real well thrive in it. And so, I think that they are doing, from a blocking and tackling standpoint, they're doing all the right things to put themselves in a strong position. They're raising good money. I mean, he's got smart people around him. Sounds like they're talking to the right kind of people. They're building the kind of operation, but, again, as everybody who's ever run for president, like, it becomes very different when, the bullets are real and you're standing in a diner in Iowa. And, again, so I don't want to predict the future, but I mean, again, I think there's no reason to think he's not an exceptionally serious contender for the presidency.
All right. Well, Steve's got a rush, and so we are very lucky to have had Steve Schale with us today. And you got to promise that you're going to come back again soon, okay, bud?
Dara, I'd love to do it. Maybe when we get through session, we'll do it after session. We can kind of wrap on where things are.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.